You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hi, welcome back to the podcast, episode 231. Today, Adrian hosting, Renaud's joining me. Hello, Renaud.
Yeah. Hey, Adrian. How are you doing?
I'm well, yes. And you've been on your travels again, I understand.
Right. Yeah. Flew back to China this morning. This time went to the north of Malaysia, in Penang, just because there's an electronic industry there. It was kind of flourishing in the 90s, and then China, sucked a lot of air out of it, and a lot of things moved to China.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the advanced or very IP sensitive kind of products remain there. So you see a lot of semiconductor business, right?
Yeah.
Intel, Infineon, and so on and so forth. And some other companies, a lot of American companies and German companies, big companies there. They have stuck there over the years. And there's a network of smaller companies and, truck manufacturers and component suppliers and so on that are there. Yeah, Penang is probably the main electronic hub of Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also got some charm. There's an island pretty close to the mainland, linked by two bridges, and it used to be a British colony and a British port. And there's some places with still, quite a bit of charm, some good food, and a lot of tourists actually, which means there's good, a number of flights from China, and I include Hong Kong in that, to Penang, including some relatively cheap airlines and so on. So it's relatively well linked to China.
Yeah, we often talk about Vietnam and India, and I mean there are other countries in Southeast Asia that are also potential candidates to source from or do some manufacturing in. So what was your feeling about Penang then? And I know that we are stressing electronics here.
Well, there's certain things where kind of too close to China to to how to say, to be really competitive on a level playing field. There's so much more on offer in China. There's so much more variety on offer, so much more price competition and so on and so forth. And companies in China have been subsidized to purchase a lot of automation, a lot of high-tech equipment, right? So it's kind of hard for any other place around to compete. However, with the Trump tariffs and things like that, and also with the higher sensitivity to risk, the risk of maybe extra tariffs or some other forms of trade obstacles for China. Well, some companies are willing to pay, let's say, a premium to reduce the risk, right? So that's an option. It's not a bad option. It's not exactly within the South China Sea. Penang is actually out. When you ship from Penang to Europe or USA East Coast, you don't need to go through the Strait of Malacca. You don't need to go through the South China Sea. So that's good.
So it'll be Indian Ocean.
Yeah, well, pretty fast. Yeah, into the Indian Ocean. I think it's called the Andaman Sea or something like that, right?
Right.
But pretty fast. Anyway, they don't need to go through the South China Sea, which is a potential clash point. So that's also something that's good, and they're not too close to China. There's a lot of things about Vietnam that just make me think the risk profile is way too close to that of China. It just doesn't make sense to move things out of China to Vietnam, or maybe for a few years, but long term, if people really want to reduce risk, it just doesn't make much sense. But places like Penang and some others make more sense, I think.
Interesting. Okay, well, I'm sure that won't be your last visit to Malaysia and indeed other similar countries. And so, yeah, look forward to learning a bit more about that. But yeah, interesting. Good. Okay. This week, a while ago, we asked the listeners if they had some questions. If you're listening now, you might have remembered we put a call out, we had a form, and some people filled it in. And one of the questions people were asking, well, they were asking some questions about supply chain and logistics. So in this particular episode, we're going to cover a few of those questions, and they're kind of like component production and inventory FAQs, if you like, right? And so we're going to pick your brain on those. And the first question today was, how do we ensure a stable supply of components?
Right. So obviously, if you have manufacturing going on, and let's say for a given product, maybe your product's bill of material has 20 rows or 50 rows, or I don't know. Maybe it's a very simple product. Maybe there's just 2 or 3 parts and very simple packaging, and that's it. Okay. But in any case, if one of the parts, cannot be procured when needed, or let's say in a predictable way, and if you cannot find it from other sources easily, that's going to be a problem for making the entire product, right? And typically the manufacturers that put together your entire product will wait until they have everything, because in most cases, making a crippled product, let's make 5,000 of them, but they're missing this component. So basically, we'll need to do rework on them once we have that component. That generally is a bad idea. Okay, that's not a good practice from a quality and reliability point of view and from an efficiency point of view. However, in some cases, it may make sense to maybe do some sub-assemblies first, keep that, and then once everything is there, maybe finish the final assembly of the product. Sometimes we do that. I mean, that's fine. That works. It allows for an earlier shipment date sometimes. So the key then, and I'm giving all that context because that's what I think the person who asked the question had in mind, right? So then they ask how to ensure a stable supply of components. Well, there's a few things, right? First, when you design your product, if you pick standard components that can easily be purchased from several sources, well, right there, we buy this, I don't know, some passive electronic components, this connector. Okay, we buy it from here, but we could also buy it from here or here or here. Sometimes it's really interchangeable, more or less, right? So you double source. You don't go custom, how to say, you avoid developing custom design parts that tie you up to one supplier, especially when that comes with also custom design molds or dies or, various forms of tooling, because then you need to invest. And then if you want to double source, maybe you need to double the investment, right? That's a bit tricky. Okay. So one thing is, keep that in mind when you are designing the product. If it's a new product you are designing yourself, pick standard products rather than custom components, if that helps, and look for double sources where possible. Now, also, of course, there's, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. It's not realistic to do that. Well, basically, you need to work with a good supplier, right? A good, reliable supplier will be able to provide you with what you need. And you also need to do your homework. You need to give them some forecasts, right? And if you really don't want much risk, you might require maybe that they produce and they keep a certain amount of inventory. Of course, you're going to pay for it, right? But vendor managed inventory, VMI, is relatively common when we go to, let's say, larger companies anyway. Maybe SMEs don't do it so often. And how do you work with a supplier? First, how do you pick the right kind of supplier for that? Well, you don't pick the fly-by-night, really lowest cost kind of little company that might just go out of business, operating, nearly out of a garage or something, right?
Yeah.
You definitely want to avoid that. You go for a more mature company that's really not going to disappear. Okay. If possible, a company that has invested in some, equipment, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just people kitting things together on a few tables, right? Also. So first thing is they don't go away too easily. Okay. You can count on them being here in 10 years. You can also gauge a little bit, do they have proper planning system? Do they have a contingency plan? Maybe a business continuity plan and things like that. Okay. Because usually if they work for relatively large companies, they will have been requested to do so. Okay. And you can gauge if, okay, that makes sense. If you're hit with this, okay, these risks kind of make sense. You have a plan. Okay. That's good. And you can recover within a certain amount of time. Okay. So if you really want to go deep into that, I would point to what the Ford Motor Company did in Thailand. I should say after the Thai flooding disasters, and there was also the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan. I mean, around 2011, there were a lot of shocks to supply chains. We talked a lot about that in the automotive industry, but also some noise in the electronics industry and so on. So it seems like COVID was a big hit suddenly, and like, oh, how come our supply chains, just crumble so easily? But actually, for people who paid attention, the same kind of shock, a different kind of shock, but of the same maybe intensity, rocked some supply chains in Asia about 10 years earlier, right? And we have a blog post about what Ford did after these incidents. And they had actually a pretty structured way to look at their suppliers of components and say, okay, if something hits them, how long until they go back? They go back to work, they go back to actually producing, and should we maybe ask them to produce in advance and we keep the inventory? Like, how much money would that be? So they have a very structured way of analyzing this and making the right kind of decisions to drive down the risk. Okay. Toyota has historically gone very, very deep into the supply chains of their component suppliers. They've been analyzing all this to death, but they haven't talked about it so much, right? But there's that professor or group of professors that worked for the Ford Motor Company and came up with a lot of details about the analytical model that they put together, right? So that's why we know about that. So you really need to have a certain policy about how you're going to work with suppliers on a strategic level, right? Are you going to try to minimize the number of custom components? Are you going to try to double source as much as possible? Or on the opposite, are you going to try to really be smart about the suppliers you pick, have some sort of key supplier relationships, and work closely with these suppliers and really, have them have a plan to be more, what's the word these days? Resilient, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Everybody's talking about resilient supply chains. They might be hit, but are they going to come back basically, right? Or are they're going to fold and be out of commission for a very long time, right? So this is strategic procurement, and it's a very deep topic, but basically, yeah. And also how much inventory you want to keep again, right? If you have something a little bit like an automotive assembly plant. Well, you have all these fixed costs and you have all these people who come to work every day and so on and so forth, right? If some components are missing, I don't know, if the the windshields are missing, the glass factory like blows up for some reason, like you're out of windshields, you are not going to send your cars out to the dealership, right? So your assembly plant at one point is just going to go full stop. And that is extremely expensive. I remember some numbers from like 15 years ago were in the vicinity of $40,000 per minute, right? If it's down. So, how do you how do you manage that, right? So if you go in the direction of just in time, well, is it real just in time? Because in the auto industry, very often they say, "Oh, it's just in time." They do their milk run and they have a truck comes every 4 hours and just delivers the stuff we need. Okay, but how much inventory is there in that supply chain? Maybe you go see the supplier, and the supplier has 3 weeks of inventory, so they're just basically storing the inventory and delivering it to you, so you don't have to manage the inventory. It goes straight by the production line, cuts your costs. However, somewhere you are paying for the costs of all the working capital, the warehousing, all the management and the handling of all these parts, right? They are in your supply chain, whether you want it or not. Okay, but maybe it's a very well fine-tuned machine and there's very little inventory. Okay, then that's good for cost. However, what's the risk, that all of a sudden they have an issue and they cannot deliver to you? Is this going to have a catastrophic financial impact on you, right? No, it's the answer will be quite different in different companies, different types of activities, and so on. Right? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's with any of these questions, because if it's a question that's from one person with a certain business selling maybe certain products, it's not always going to be one size fits all. But yeah, I think that covers it pretty well. The second one, if we move on. Oh, by the way, you mentioned the blog post about Ford. So anything like that, we'll be putting those in the show notes. So remember to check those. So the second question that we had, how do we manage the lead times for components and production? And this one made you chuckle a bit.
Yeah. So that's such a wide question.
Yeah.
We really need more context. However, I'll give it a shot. Yeah. If it's a standard component, okay, I'm going to look at components first. If it's a standard component and you can find it easily from various distributors, resellers, basically, unless something really goes wrong, the lead time is going to be very short. You don't really need to manage it. You have an issue, you just call a distributor and, hey, send me whatever, 2 boxes of this or something. Okay. If it is a component that comes with a long lead time, you definitely need to take that into account and you need to order them earlier, right? And if you have a lot of economic, power, you're a big buyer. So you're a big buyer of this type of component. You might be able to negotiate something, have a contract with the supplier. Okay, that was very common around 2021, 2022, when a lot of chips were on shortage. So you would have to go directly to the component supplier if you were buying a sufficient number of chips, and they had certain conditions and so on. And you would commit to buying it at a certain price, etc., etc. Then you kind of jump the line a little bit, okay, and you can buy direct from the supplier. Otherwise, very often there were all kinds of resellers and traders that actually made things worse because they bought when they started to see some shortage, they bought at, let's say, $2, then the price goes up to $10, then they are thinking maybe it's going to go up to $25, which in some cases it did, and they try to time the market and then sell and make a nice surplus. Okay, so they make things worse by holding on components. However, well, if you just need a small quantity and you're ready to pay the price, they actually kind of make your life easier. However, you really need to make sure that it's not refurbished. It's really new. It is not fake. There were so many issues with that. Okay, unscrupulous trading companies. Oh, it's in Hong Kong. It's in a warehouse. You can go have a look. Whatever. Very risky. Apart from that, okay, there's so many cases here. It's a bit. I'm not going to pretend I'm going to cover everything, right? Just whatever comes to my mind here, because I don't have much context. But if that component has to come from a specific supplier, then it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Pick the right suppliers, manage them, do a risk analysis with them, have a contingency plan, give them forecast, be reasonable. I see a lot of companies, they don't want to give a forecast. They just say, oh, whenever I give a PO, then, you have 40 days or something, for a product or for a component, maybe, oh, whenever we send a PO to you guys, you have 10 days or something. Well, try to get forecasts, through your supply chain, maybe from your customers and to your suppliers and to your suppliers' suppliers, at least the strategically important ones. And that will make things much easier. And maybe you need to actually to have like a non-commit kind of forecast and a commit forecast. Okay. In a commit forecast, you have to buy it within a certain time. And maybe you buy it and it still remains in their warehouse. Again, vendor managed inventory, right? But if you're highly certain that you will consume it at one point anyway, well, why not, right? So there's all kinds of strategies that make sense for certain cases and don't for other cases. Okay. The second part of your question is for production. So let's say you buy a finished product, and I guess a lot of our readers just say, I don't really want to care about the components. Like, why does he keep talking about components, right? I just want the finished product. Okay. Basically, finished products directly depend on the availability of the components that make them up, right? As I mentioned earlier. But if you just look at the level of the finished product and your supplier gives you a certain lead time and you feel that the lead time is a bit long, not it doesn't really make sense, well, you can try to challenge them and you can try to see. Some of the factories, we go and we visit them and I think, oh, this is crazy. And you kind of calculate and you say, well, from the moment the components arrive to the moment the finished products go out, you guys, it takes you 3 months, and you have, piles of components and you put your finger on them and you see it's already very dusty and they don't like to do changeovers. They will just say, oh, it's much more economical to do like this. So they will load the stamping machine, they will set it up and they will go and they will keep going for 10,000 parts. And then they will change over and then they will do another 10,000 or 20,000 parts. And they haven't, big containers full of parts that have to wait somewhere. By the way, this is very, very detrimental to quality also, because, well, if you have an issue on these parts, when are you going to find out about it? Maybe 1 month later when you try to assemble the part and you're like, it doesn't fit very well or something like that. So maybe it's because of a very bad case of batch and queue, right? We call it batch and queue, so big batch and long queue. which is really the opposite of the Toyota production system, lean manufacturing, and so on. Okay. And maybe it's something else. Maybe they depend on the supplier that's very, very slow. And then have they actually looked into it? Why? Why? Why do we buy the components from that supplier? Why are they so slow? What can be done about that? Right? And that's where also having transparency in the supply chain is so important, because if you don't have any transparency into the supply chain, they would not tell you. They would say, well, that's the way it is, and keep going, nothing to see. They don't want you to put your hands in their supply chain. If you don't have transparency, basically it's not your supply chain. It's not really your product. It's kind of their supply chain, and in a way it is kind of their product, or totally their product. It depends, but they feel that they own a part of it anyway. So if you don't have transparency, then you cannot put the finger on the problems, and they would just tell you, well, that's the best we can do. Sorry, it's kind of a business secret. Don't ask too many questions. Can't really answer. Sorry, my boss is not comfortable with that. Please, change the topic. And you don't know why. So it's always like that. You always need to ask why, and if possible, go have a look and try to really put the finger on the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually physically getting out there, we're past the days of the COVID lockdown now. That's been and gone. So China, for example, it's pretty accessible now.
Yep, totally. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Yeah, how to manage the lead times. Well, and obviously manage it with the lead times that you promise to your customers, right? That's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Okay, good. Right. And the third one, this is the last question then. Also, how to handle your inventory and warehousing.
Right. So, yeah, inventory is linked to the previous two questions, right?
Yeah.
Do you need more inventory as a way to stave off some potential disruptions in your supply chain, so you can keep delivering to your customers, you can keep continuity of supply for longer, right? If maybe a key supplier goes down, or maybe you're not happy with your key supplier, you're going to move your production to another supplier. However, there's going to be a sort of a downtime, right, before the new supplier is able to produce at the right quality level, and with all the learnings, etc. Maybe there's 4 or 5 months. Well, maybe you need to stock up, on products from the previous supplier. And the problem is, if the previous supplier is sending you, bad products that fail maybe 20% of the time, what are you going to do, right? You need to send inspectors and really sort through all that stuff. Okay. So that's the question, sort of how much inventory. Okay. And also, if you have long lead times to get the products, but your customers expect a much shorter lead time, you need to be sort of a buffer. You need to have inventory as a buffer. Okay. Again, that's kind of obvious. Now, inventory can be in several places in the supply chain. I mentioned already vendor managed inventory. Obviously, you need to pay for that, because they need to have to keep some working capital just for that, and that's not cheap. They're going to warehouse it, that takes space, and so on and so forth. But maybe it's cheaper for you if they do it rather than you do it, right? And maybe you produce in China, and maybe you sell products in, let's say it's not electrical, so no problem with the plugs, no problem with the voltage or anything. Like, the same product can be sold in Australia, in USA, or in Europe. Okay. And basically, you have the supplier produce, and then maybe you're gonna send half of this with this ratio among these 3 areas, and then the rest you're going to keep it for a while, and then when we accumulate, okay, like every 2 weeks you will do a shipment. We will know the quantity as we get the orders coming in, right? Some people do that, and sometimes they keep the products maybe in a Hong Kong warehouse. Okay, that's pretty expensive, but it's already out of China. I mean, there's various ways to do that, or it's exported out of China. Again, sort of as a batch every few weeks. There's various ways to do that. Okay. It could be kept in a regional distribution center. So if you sell all through the European Union, but maybe you're going to receive in the Netherlands, maybe you want to keep it in the Netherlands in a regional distribution center. And then from there, you will send to maybe directly to the shops in various countries or some other distribution channels and so on and so forth. Okay. Again, there's so many cases, right? If you're going to drop ship from China, then you produce and maybe the manufacturer directly is going to drop ship. If they do that, or find a service provider who can do that, fulfillment service provider. There's a lot of companies nowadays that do that. It's not that complicated. Even we do it. So just need a specific kind of IT system that will link to your Shopify, your WooCommerce account, or something like that, or your ERP. So you don't need to keep everything in Excel files and like send emails and everything, right? So again, if it's drop shipment direct from China, inventory is going to be in China until it's shipped, and then once it's shipped directly to the end user. The people who need to receive it, typically one by one. Okay. We see people who have done a crowdfunding campaign, maybe on Kickstarter, and they see, okay, there's certain countries where we just have a few products to deliver. So in that case, probably drop shipping makes sense. And in some other countries, there's maybe a lot of products in a certain place, maybe in the USA. Okay, then in the USA, send to one warehouse, and then from that warehouse, have it dispatched like within the country. Okay, it's going to be cheaper. But that also depends on the size of the size and weight of the product, because drop shipment is interesting when you have a relatively small and light product. Okay, you don't do that for sofas or TVs.
Right.
It's not for this kind of bigger products.
Yep.
Did I kind of cover it, or?
Yeah, I think so. And talking about the drop shipping there as well. I mean, if you're a drop shipper, does it depend on your location, where you're gonna store the goods, or like if you bring it centrally?
If you drop ship, generally if you make in China, you're just going to drop ship from China.
Right.
So
okay. So you wouldn't bring it to your country and then have it sent straight out to the customers from a like a 3PL or something?
Could be. But again, it depends on if you have, I don't know, 10 products to deliver in New Zealand and 30 products to deliver in Australia. Maybe it doesn't make much sense to send to one place and then again, have someone again to work on it and like send them one by one within the country. Right. So drop shipment probably makes sense. But if you have 5,000 products to deliver in the USA, then put them on pallets, send them to one place in the USA, and then from there deliver within the country. That's probably going to be cheaper.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Good. Well, those are some interesting questions. So we've been through ensuring a stable supply of components, managing lead times for components and production, and handling the inventory and warehousing. And yeah, I think that's some good FAQs there. And I'm sure that whoever sent those questions in, I'm sure some other listeners will also be thinking the same thing. So yeah, good one, Renaud. Enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks a lot.
And as ever, we will be back next week. Please check the show notes if you want to get in touch leave a review, or ask questions of your own that we will answer on the podcast.
Sounds great.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.